The rain came down like punishment. Eliza stood ankle-deep in mud that sucked at her boots with every step, one hand clutching her carpet bag, the other gripping the stagecoach door she'd just stumbled through. The driver didn't wait, didn't even look back. Just cracked his whip and sent the horses lurching forward, wheels spraying filth across her already ruined traveling dress. She watched the coach disappear into sheets of gray rain, taking with it the last thread connecting her to everything she knew. "Well," she said to no one, "here we are." The town of Redemption, Texas looked like something God started and forgot to finish. A dozen buildings crouched along a single mud-choked street, their wooden faces already beaten gray by sun and wind. A saloon, a general store with a crooked sign, something that might have been a church, though the cross on top leaned at an angle that suggested doubt rather than faith. No train station, no telegraph office. Nothing that spoke of civilization or second chances, just mud, rain, and the kind of silence that made a woman question every decision that led her here. Eliza's fingers found the letters in her pocket, 6 of them, worn soft at the edges from reading and rereading. Written in a careful hand that belonged to Caleb Rourke, rancher, widower, and the man who'd answered her advertisement with something that almost looked like honesty. "I won't lie to you. This land is hard. The work is harder. I need a wife, and you need a fresh start. If you can live with truth instead of poetry, we might manage. No promises of love. No flowery language about destiny or fate. Just a transaction spelled out in ink that didn't pretend to be anything else." She'd appreciated that. Still did, standing here in the rain with mud creeping over her ankles and doubt creeping higher. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Eliza turned to find a woman in the doorway of the general store, 50-something, with eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. She held a shawl over her head against the rain, studying Eliza the way you'd study a horse before buying it. "You the mail-order bride?" The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true, and hearing them out loud in this gray nothing of a town made the whole thing real in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm Eliza Hartwell." She tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to meet Caleb Rourke." The woman's expression didn't change. "You know you're coming today." "I wrote. The letter should have arrived 2 weeks ago." "Should have." The woman stepped back into the doorway, making space. "Storm's been sitting on us for 3 days. Roads are a mess. If your letter came through, it probably drowned getting here." She paused. "You want to wait inside? No sense catching your death before you even meet him." It wasn't kindness, exactly. More like the practical courtesy you'd extend to livestock caught in bad weather. But Eliza's teeth had started chattering, and pride didn't keep you warm. "Thank you." The store smelled like coffee, leather, and something sweet she couldn't place. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with the kinds of goods that kept people alive in places that didn't care whether they lived or died. Flour, beans, rope, ammunition. The woman moved behind the counter, pulling out a tin cup and filling it from a pot that sat near the stove. "Coffee?" "Please." Eliza wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. The coffee tasted like it had been sitting since morning, bitter and thick, but she drank it anyway. "Martha Pruitt." The woman leaned against the counter. "I run this place with my husband. Been here 14 years, which makes me practically ancient by Redemption standards." "People don't stay?" "Some do, most don't. Land breaks them first, or the loneliness does, or they figure out they're not cut out for the kind of life that don't hand you anything easy." Martha's eyes traveled over Eliza's mud-stained dress, her soaked hair, the carpet bag that held everything she owned. "Where are you from?" "Philadelphia." "Long way." "Yes." "What'd you do there?" The question came casual, but Eliza heard the weight behind it. This woman was measuring her, same as everyone in this town would measure her, trying to figure out if she'd last a month or a season or a year. "I was a seamstress in a dress shop on Chestnut Street." She didn't mention that she'd also kept the books, managed the orders, and effectively run the place after Mrs. Duvall's hands got too shaky to thread a needle. "Before that, I worked in my father's printing shop until he died." "So you can read and write?" "Yes." "Good with numbers?" "Good enough." Martha nodded slowly, like these facts meant something. Caleb's last wife couldn't do either. Sweet girl, but not built for this country. Fever took her the first winter. The words dropped into the space between them, like stones into a well. Eliza had known Caleb was a widower. He'd mentioned it in his second letter, brief and factual, the way you'd mention a broken fence or a dry summer. What he hadn't mentioned was how recently he'd lost her or whether he'd finished grieving. How long ago? 3 years. Martha refilled her own cup. He doesn't talk about her, doesn't talk about much, truth be told. Keeps to his ranch, comes into town once a month for supplies, pays his debts, and leaves. Decent man, far as that goes. But not what you'd call warm. I'm not looking for warm. The words came out sharper than Eliza intended. I'm looking for honest work and a roof that doesn't leak. Martha's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close to approval. Then you might just be the right kind of fool for this place. The door banged open. A man stood in the frame, rain streaming off his hat and coat, boots caked in mud up to the knees. He was tall, taller than Eliza expected, with shoulders that came from hard work rather than good breeding. His face was weathered the way wood gets weathered, all sharp angles and rough grain, and his eyes were the color of smoke. He looked at Martha first, then at Eliza, and something crossed his face too quick to name. You Eliza Hartwell? His voice matched the letters. No decoration, no wasted words. She set down her coffee cup, suddenly aware of how she must look, drowned and muddy and probably half crazy for being here at all. I am. You're Caleb Rourke? He nodded once, didn't move from the doorway, didn't shake her hand or welcome her or do any of the things she'd half expected from a man meeting his intended bride. Your letter said you'd arrive next week. The schedule changed. I sent word. Didn't get it. He glanced at Martha. Roads? Washed out south of here. Mails backed up in Brewster, probably. Caleb absorbed this information with the same flat expression he'd worn since walking in. Then he looked back at Eliza, studying her the way Martha had studied her, the way this whole damn town would probably study her. You bring much. She gestured to the carpet bag. What you see. That's it? I didn't have much worth bringing. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite surprise, but maybe a kind of grim recognition, like he understood the particular brand of desperation that made a woman leave everything behind for the promise of nothing guaranteed. Ranch is 6 miles out. He tilted his head toward the door. We should go before it gets dark. Road's bad enough in daylight. Eliza's stomach clenched. She'd imagined this moment 100 different ways on the journey here. Some version of a proper introduction, maybe supper at a boarding house, time to catch her breath before being shuttled off to whatever life waited for her. But this wasn't Philadelphia. There were no boarding houses, no gentle transitions. Just a stranger in a doorway, rain hammering the roof, and a choice that had already been made days ago when she bought her ticket west. She picked up her bag. I'm ready. Caleb looked at her a moment longer, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words worth saying. Then he turned and walked back into the rain. Martha caught Eliza's arm as she moved to follow. Listen, her voice dropped low. He's not cruel, but he's not easy either, and this country will grind you down if you let it. You need anything at all, you come find me. Understand? Eliza nodded, throat tight. Then she stepped out into the storm. Caleb's horse stood tied to the post outside, a big bay gelding that didn't flinch when thunder rolled overhead. Next to him, a smaller mare stamped and pulled at her reins, eyes rolling white. She's for you. Caleb untied the mare, holding the rein steady. Name's Ginger. She's got a temper, but she'll get you where you need to go. Eliza stared at the horse, at the saddle sitting high on its back, at the muddy ground and the rain and the 6 miles of unknown country stretching between here and whatever Caleb called home. I don't ride. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb's jaw tightened. At all? I never had cause to learn. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there in the rain, holding the reins of a horse she couldn't ride, probably recalculating every assumption he'd made about her based on those careful letters. All right. He handed her his horse's reins instead. You'll ride Buck. He's steadier. I just told you I don't. I heard you. He moved to the mare, swinging up into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Hold the horn, keep your heels down. He'll follow Ginger. What about you? I'll manage. Before Eliza could argue, Caleb reached down and took her bag, securing it behind his saddle. Then he looked at her expectantly. She looked at the horse, at the stirrup hanging somewhere around her shoulder, at the street turning to soup under the rain. I need help getting up. No shame in her voice, just fact. Caleb dismounted, walked over, and without asking permission put his hands on her waist and lifted her into the saddle like she weighed nothing at all. The touch was brief and impersonal, but Eliza felt it anyway, the strength in his hands, the certainty in the gesture. Then he was on the ground, walking ahead of both horses, mud sucking at his boots with every step. Wait! Eliza grabbed for the reins, nearly dropping them. You're walking. You need the horse. So do you. He didn't look back. 6 miles won't kill me. And that was it. No discussion, no negotiation. Caleb Rourke just started walking through the rain, leading his mare with one hand, and Eliza had no choice but to follow on a horse she didn't know how to ride, toward a home she'd never seen, with a man who'd rather walk through mud than share the saddle behind her. The storm pressed down on them like something with weight. Thunder came in rolling crashes that made Ginger shy sideways, and every time the mare spooked, Buck followed, leaving Eliza grabbing for the saddle horn and trying not to fall. Rain ran down her face, soaked through her clothes, turned the road into a river of mud that grabbed at the horse's hooves and Caleb's boots with equal hunger. And still he walked. No complaining, no stopping. Just one foot in front of the other, shoulders hunched against the rain, leading them forward through country that looked the same in every direction: scrub brush, rocky soil, and sky the color of old iron. After the first mile, Eliza stopped trying to see where they were going, stopped trying to fix her hair or wipe the rain from her face, just held on and watched the man walking ahead of her, trying to understand what kind of person chose this life on purpose. After the second mile, guilt started gnawing at her. Mr. Rourke. He didn't turn. Maybe didn't hear her over the rain. She tried again, louder. Mr. Rourke. This time he glanced back. You should ride. I can walk for a while. No. I'm not delicate. I can manage. Didn't say you were delicate. He kept walking. Said you can't ride, so you ride. The logic was infuriating and absolute. After the third mile, her hands started cramping from gripping the saddle horn. Her legs ached from trying to stay balanced. And the cold had worked its way so deep into her bones that she couldn't remember what warm felt like. But Caleb just kept walking. She watched him, really watched him now that there was nothing else to do. Noticed the way he moved, efficient and deliberate, no wasted motion. The way he checked the road ahead, eyes scanning for washouts or loose rocks that might trip the horses. The way he'd glance back every few minutes, not at her, but at Buck, making sure the horse wasn't struggling. This was a man who'd learned to survive in a place that didn't care whether he did or not. And he was doing it for her. This stranger he'd never met. Walking through hell in boots that were probably letting in water because she'd shown up wrong-footed and useless. Something twisted in Eliza's chest. Not quite gratitude, not quite guilt. Something sharper and harder to name. After the fourth mile, the rain started to ease, not stopping, but pulling back. Like it was satisfied it had punished them enough. The clouds thinned and tore, letting through bars of late afternoon light that turned the wet grass gold. Ahead, the land started to change. The flat scrub gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance, Eliza could see the dark line of trees that marked a creek or river. Caleb stopped. There! He pointed to a cluster of buildings maybe half a mile ahead, tucked into a fold of land where the hills met the water. That's home. Eliza squinted through the rain-blurred air. A house, a barn, corrals and outbuildings that looked like they'd been built by someone who knew what they were doing but didn't have money to waste on decoration. Everything was wood and function, built low to the ground like it was trying not to be noticed. It looked lonely and permanent. It's bigger than I expected, she said, because it was true, and because the silence felt too heavy. Had to be. I run cattle, need space for the work. How many head? He glanced at her, something almost like surprise crossing his face. 140, give or take. Lost some to the drought last summer, building back up. Is that enough to make a living? It is if you're careful. They started moving again, and Eliza's heart started beating faster. Because this was it, the place she'd signed away her old life for, the home she'd agreed to keep for a man she didn't know, the place that would either save her or break her. As they got closer, details emerged. The house was single-story, solid-looking, with a porch that wrapped around the front and one side. The barn was bigger than the house, which made sense on a cattle ranch. There were corrals made of split rails, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what looked like a bunkhouse, though she couldn't imagine who'd sleep there. Caleb led them straight to the barn. He helped her down from the saddle, same impersonal grip on her waist, same efficiency, and then set about unsaddling both horses while she stood there dripping and useless. "You should go inside," he said without looking at her. "Get dry." "I can help." "You don't know how." "So teach me." He stopped, saddle half off Buck's back, and looked at her properly for the first time since they'd left town. Really looked, like he was trying to see past the mud and exhaustion to whatever was underneath. "Why?" "Because I'll need to know eventually, and because standing here watching you work makes me feel like cargo." A muscle jumped in his jaw. Then he nodded once. "All right, pay attention." He walked her through it, how to loosen the cinch, how to lift the saddle without dropping it, where to hang the tack so it would dry properly. His instructions were clear and patient, though his voice stayed flat, like he was explaining something to a hired hand rather than the woman he planned to marry. But he didn't dismiss her, didn't tell her she was in the way, and when she fumbled the bridle and dropped it in the mud, he just picked it up, rinsed it in the water trough, and handed it back without comment. By the time the horses were rubbed down and turned into their stalls, Eliza's hands were shaking with cold and fatigue. But she'd done it, helped, proven she could learn. Caleb latched the barn door and picked up her carpet bag. "House is this way." She followed him across the yard, boots squelching, to the porch steps. He pushed open the door and stepped aside, letting her go in first. The house was dark, cold, empty in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of furniture, but it was dry. Caleb set her bag down near the door and moved to the fireplace, kneeling to build a fire with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. Within minutes, flames were crackling, pushing back the darkness. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, taking it in. One main room that served as kitchen and living space both. A table with 2 chairs. A stove. Shelves lined with basic supplies, flour, coffee, salt. 2 doors leading off to what must be bedrooms. Everything clean and functional and utterly devoid of personality. A house where someone lived, but didn't quite inhabit. "You'll take the bedroom," Caleb gestured to the door on the left. "There's blankets in the chest, wash basin on the dresser." "Where will you sleep?" "Bunkhouse." Eliza's chest tightened. "That's not necessary." "It is until we're married." He was already moving toward the door. "There's beans on the shelf, bread in the tin. Help yourself. I'll be back in the morning." "Wait." He stopped, hand on the doorknob. Eliza's mind raced, trying to find the right words. Because this felt wrong. Him walking back out into the rain, sleeping somewhere else, while she took his bed and his house like she had any right to them. "We should talk. About arrangements. Expectations. Tomorrow." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "You're tired. So am I. We'll figure it out in the morning." And then he was gone, door closing behind him, leaving Eliza alone in a stranger's house with a fire that was already burning down. She stood there for a long time, listening to the rain on the roof and the settling sounds of an unfamiliar place. Then she walked to the bedroom, pushed open the door, and found a space that was even emptier than the main room. A bed. A dresser. A window looking out at nothing but darkness. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wet clothes, and pulled out Caleb's letters one more time. Read them by firelight filtering through the doorway, looking for some clue about the man who'd walked 6 miles in the rain and then exiled himself to a bunkhouse rather than share space with her. "I won't lie to you. This land is hard. The work is harder." The words felt true in a way they hadn't before, because she was here now, sitting in the silence of it, feeling the weight of what she'd chosen. But there was another line too, one she'd almost forgotten. If you can live with truth instead of poetry, we might manage. Might. Not a promise, not even a probability, just a possibility that required both of them to be tougher and more honest than most people ever had to be. Eliza folded the letters and put them back in her pocket. Then she stood, peeled off her wet clothes, wrapped herself in blankets that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and lay down in a dead woman's bed. Outside, the rain kept falling, and somewhere in the bunkhouse, a man she was supposed to marry in 3 days was probably lying awake too, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. She woke to sunlight, bright, relentless, cutting through the window like a blade. For a moment, Eliza didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The stagecoach, the rain, the 6-mile walk, the stranger who'd left her here. She sat up, heart pounding. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She dressed quickly in the only clean clothes she had left, a simple cotton dress that had been packed at the bottom of her bag, and walked into the main room. Coffee sat on the stove, still warm. Fresh biscuits on a plate covered with cloth, and a note in that same careful handwriting. Gone to check the south fence. Back by noon. Help yourself. No signature. No endearments. Just information. Eliza poured coffee, ate a biscuit that was better than it had any right to be, and walked out onto the porch. The world had transformed overnight. Rain-washed and brilliant, the land stretched out in shades of green and gold she hadn't seen in yesterday's gray. The creek ran full and noisy. Birds she couldn't name called from trees she couldn't identify, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt. Beautiful. Harsh. Real in a way Philadelphia had never been real. She stood there drinking it in, trying to imagine herself in this place, married to a man who barely spoke, making a life out of mud and hope. Then movement caught her eye. Caleb, walking toward the house from the direction of the barn, leading a horse behind him. He saw her and stopped, just for a moment, like he hadn't expected her to be up yet. Then he kept coming. Morning. He tied the horse to the porch rail. Morning. Sleep all right? Well enough. She gestured to the empty plate visible through the door. Thank you for breakfast. He nodded, already moving on to the next thing. Figured we should talk about how this is going to work. All right. Caleb took off his hat, ran a hand through the hair that was dark and overdue for cutting, and leaned against the porch rail like he was bracing for something difficult. I'm not good at pretty words, he started, so I'm just going to say it plain. I need a wife. You need a home. That's the arrangement. I'll provide for you, keep you safe, treat you fair. But I can't promise more than that. I didn't ask for more. I know, but I need to make sure you understand. His eyes met hers, steady and serious. This isn't going to be easy. The work is hard. The weather's worse. We're 6 miles from town and the neighbors aren't close. You'll be alone a lot when I'm working the herd. And there's no going back if you change your mind. I won't change my mind. You don't know that yet. Neither do you. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but maybe the ghost of one. Fair point. They stood there in the morning light, two people trying to negotiate a future neither of them could see clearly. What do you need from me? Eliza asked. Honestly? Always. Caleb was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. I need someone who can keep a house. Cook, clean, manage supplies. The garden too. We grow most of what we eat, and I don't have time to tend it proper. Chickens need feeding, eggs need collecting, and when branding season comes, I'll need extra hands with the work. I can do those things. Even the branding? I've never done it, but I can learn, same as I learned the horses last night. He studied her, weighing that claim against some internal measure. What about you? What do you need? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected instructions, expectations, rules, not reciprocity. Honestly? Always. Eliza took a breath. I need respect. I'm not asking for love, but I won't be treated like property either. We're partners in this, even if we're strangers. That means my opinions matter. My work matters. I matter. Caleb nodded slowly. Anything else? Teach me. Everything you can. About the ranch, the work, the land, because if something happens to you, I need to be able to keep this place running. His eyebrows rose slightly. You planning on me dying? I'm planning on surviving. This time the smile was real, brief and surprised, like she'd said something that genuinely amused him. All right then, partners. He held out his hand. Eliza took it, feeling the calluses and strength, the size of his palm against hers. They shook once, formal and strange, and somehow more binding than any vow they'd speak in front of the town. Wedding set for Saturday, Caleb said, releasing her hand. Reverend Porter will come out. We'll do it here, keep it simple. That work for you? That works. Good. He picked up his hat, settled it back on his head. I need to finish checking fences. You want to come along, start learning the land? Eliza looked at the horse tied to the rail, at the vast country rolling away in every direction, at the man offering her exactly what she'd asked for, a chance to learn, to be useful, to matter. Yes, she said. I want to come. And she did. Caleb saddled Buck for her again, though this time he showed her how to do it herself, pulling the cinch tight, checking the stirrups, making sure everything sat right before mounting. His hands moved with practiced certainty, and Eliza watched every motion, committing it to memory the way she'd once memorized stitch patterns and fabric weights. You'll need to practice this until you can do it blind, he said, testing the girth one more time. Horse throws a shoe or goes lame 5 miles out, you need to be able to handle your own tack. How often does that happen? Often enough that you should know how. He swung up onto Ginger without using the stirrup, just a smooth pull that put him in the saddle like he'd been born there. Eliza managed to mount Buck with only slightly less grace, and they headed out across the pasture toward the southern property line. The land looked different in daylight, bigger, emptier. The grass stretched away in rolling waves, broken by clusters of mesquite, and the occasional live oak twisted into shapes that spoke of constant wind. Cattle grazed in loose groups, red and white hides bright against the green, and they lifted their heads to watch the riders pass with mild, chewing interest. How much land do you have? Eliza asked. 1.5 sections, 960 acres, give or take. The numbers meant nothing to her. In Philadelphia, she'd measured space in rooms and city blocks. But watching Caleb's eyes scan the horizon like he could see every inch of it in his mind, she understood it was both everything and not nearly enough. Is that considered large here? It's enough to work alone if you're careful, not enough to get rich. He pointed toward a distant line of darker vegetation. That's the creek. Runs year-round mostly. It's what makes this land worth having. Water rights matter more than acreage in this country. They rode in silence for a while, and Eliza tried to absorb it all. The scale, the isolation, the strange beauty of a place that didn't care whether you appreciated it or not. The sun climbed higher, turning the air warm and thick with the smell of grass and earth and something sharp she thought might be sage. How long have you been here? She asked. 5 years. Bought the land with money I saved working trail drives up to Kansas. Built the house the first year, mostly by myself, barn the second year. Been building the herd ever since. That's a lot of work for one person. It is. He didn't elaborate. Eliza glanced at him, trying to read the closed expression that seemed to be his permanent state. Your last wife. Martha mentioned her. Did she help with the ranch work? Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, quiet and flat, Sarah wasn't built for this kind of life. She tried, but the land was too much for her, too empty, too hard. What happened to her? Fever. Winter of 72. Doc couldn't get out here in time because of the snow. His hands shifted on the reins, the only sign that the memory still had teeth. She was dead 3 days before the roads cleared enough to bury her proper. The words landed like stones. No decoration, no attempt to soften them. Eliza's throat felt tight. I'm sorry. Don't be. She knew what she was getting into when she married me, same as you do now. He looked at her directly. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what you're signing on for. This place doesn't forgive mistakes, doesn't give you time to figure things out. You need to be strong enough to survive it. And if I'm not, then you'll end up buried next to her. The bluntness should have scared her, maybe would have scared her a week ago, standing in Philadelphia with options still open. But here, under this enormous sky, with 6 miles and a mud-soaked journey already behind her, it just felt like truth. "I'm stronger than I look," she said. Caleb studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "We'll find out." They reached the fence line around midday, a stretch of split rail and barbed wire that looked newer than the rest, and Eliza could see where recent rains had undermined a section of posts, leaving them tilted and loose. Caleb dismounted and pulled tools from his saddlebag: hammer, wire cutters, spare nails. He worked without speaking, resetting posts and tightening wire with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this job 100 times before. Eliza watched for a few minutes, then climbed down from Buck and walked over. "Show me." He glanced up, hammer raised. "This isn't light work. Neither is washing clothes or hauling water, but I'll be doing both. Show me how to fix a fence." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or reassessment. Then he handed her the hammer. "All right, drive that post straight. Use the weight of the hammer, not just your arm." She tried, missed the nail head completely on the first swing and bent the nail on the second. Caleb didn't comment, just handed her another nail and stepped back to let her figure it out. By the 5th nail, she'd found a rhythm. By the 10th, her shoulder ached, but the post stood solid. "Good enough," Caleb said, and it felt like high praise. They worked through the afternoon, moving down the fence line, and Eliza learned the specific misery of manual labor under a Texas sun. Her hands blistered, her back screamed. Sweat ran into her eyes and turned the dust on her skin to mud. But she kept working because stopping felt like admitting defeat, and she'd come too far to fail at the first real test. When they finally finished, Caleb surveyed the repaired section with a critical eye, then nodded. "That'll hold. Let's head back." The ride home felt longer. Eliza's body had discovered muscles she didn't know she had, and every one of them hurt. But there was something else too, a strange satisfaction in having done real work, work that mattered, work that would still be here tomorrow, holding the cattle in and the wild country out. As they crested a rise that gave them a view of the ranch buildings, Caleb reined in. "See that smoke?" Eliza followed his gaze. A thin column of gray rose from somewhere near the house, too much to be the kitchen stove. Caleb's whole body went tense, like, "Stay here." "What's wrong?" But he was already spurring Ginger into a gallop, leaving Eliza no choice but to follow as best she could on Buck, her sore muscles screaming protest. By the time she caught up, Caleb had dismounted and was staring at the chicken coop, or what was left of it. The door hung open, splintered and torn. Feathers drifted across the yard like snow. And inside the coop, 2 chickens lay dead, their bodies ripped apart with brutal efficiency. "Coyote," Caleb said, voice tight with controlled anger. "Or maybe a fox. Got in through the gap under the door I've been meaning to fix." Eliza slid down from Buck, legs shaking, and walked closer. The destruction was complete. Not just the 2 dead birds, but the rest of the flock scattered or missing entirely. The smoke they'd seen was coming from the smokehouse, where apparently the predator had knocked over a lantern in its rampage. Caleb had already moved to put out the small fire, working with quick, angry movements. When it was out, he stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at the damage with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. Defeat. "How many chickens did you have?" Eliza asked quietly. 12? Now, maybe 6 if the others come back." He kicked at the ruined coop door. "Eggs were a steady income. Small, but steady. Now that's gone until I can rebuild the flock." Eliza looked at the dead birds, at the scattered feathers, at this man who'd walked 6 miles in the rain for a stranger and was now losing his temper over chickens. And she understood suddenly how thin the margin was out here, how one piece of bad luck could cascade into disaster. "We'll rebuild," she said. "We?" "You said this was a partnership. Partners rebuild together." Caleb looked at her like he was trying to decide if she was naive or stubborn, or possibly both. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension bleeding out. "All right, tomorrow we'll ride into town, get new chickens and lumber. Fix the coop proper this time." He paused. "You know how to build anything?" "I can learn." "You say that a lot." "Because it's true." This time the almost smile reached his eyes. Yeah, I'm starting to believe it might be. That night, Eliza cooked supper on the stove while Caleb sat at the table cleaning his rifle. It was a domestic scene that should have felt natural, but instead felt strange. Two people occupying the same space but not quite together, like actors playing roles they hadn't rehearsed. She'd found beans and salt pork in the pantry, and she made them the way her mother had taught her, with onions and a little molasses. Simple food, but honest. When she set the plates down, Caleb looked mildly surprised. "Smells good." "Don't sound so shocked." "Didn't mean it like that, just Sarah never got the hang of cooking. Everything came out either burned or raw." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "This is good. Really good." "It's beans." "Yeah, but they taste like something other than boot leather." They ate in comfortable silence, and Eliza found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile the man who'd carried her bag and built her a fire with the man who'd walked away to sleep in the bunkhouse, trying to understand someone who could be kind without being warm, generous without being open. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Probably can't stop you." "Why did you answer my advertisement?" Caleb set down his fork, considering the question with the same seriousness he brought to everything. "Needed help. Ranch is too much for one person, and I can't afford to hire hands year-round. A wife made sense." "That's practical, but there must have been other women who answered the ad." "There were, 3 others." "So why me?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Your letter was different. The others talked about finding love, making a home, having children. You talked about work, about learning, about being useful." He met her eyes. "Figured a woman who led with practicality instead of romance might actually survive out here." It was probably the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. No flattery, no pretense, just brutal assessment. "You're right," she said. "I don't have illusions about what this is." "Good. Illusions get people killed in this country." The next morning, they rode into Redemption together. The town looked slightly less miserable in sunlight, though not by much. Caleb tied the horses outside the general store and held the door for Eliza, and she was aware of eyes tracking their movement from windows and doorways. The mail-order bride and her taciturn rancher, already a subject of speculation. Martha looked up from the counter as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in Eliza's sun-reddened face and work-roughened hands. "You survived the first few days? That's something." "Barely," Eliza admitted. "She did fine," Caleb said, surprising them both. "Need to buy some chickens, and lumber for a new coop. You know anyone selling?" "Jensen's got laying hens. Probably asked too much for them, but they're good birds." Martha pulled out a ledger. "Lumber you can get at Harrison's mill. Tell him I sent you. He might not gouge you too bad." While Caleb discussed quantities and prices, Eliza wandered the store, taking inventory of what was available. The selection was limited but practical. Flour, sugar, coffee, basic dry goods. Bolts of rough fabric. A few precious luxuries like real tea and chocolate that probably cost a week's wages. She was examining a bolt of calico when a voice behind her said, "You're the new Mrs. Rourke, or will be, come Saturday." Eliza turned to find a woman about her own age, pretty in a soft way that already looked worn at the edges. She wore a dress that had been fine once but was now faded and patched, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Almost. I'm Eliza Hartwell." "Caroline Webb. My husband owns the land east of Caleb's." She glanced toward where Caleb stood talking to Martha. "Caused quite a stir when word got out he was bringing in a bride. Half the women in this county had their eye on him." "Did you?" The bluntness of the question clearly caught Caroline off guard. Then she laughed, a little bitter. "No, already made that mistake once." She lowered her voice. "Word of advice? Don't expect him to soften. Caleb Rourke is exactly what you see. Solid, dependable, and about as warm as January creek water. Sarah nearly went mad from the loneliness before the fever took her." Eliza kept her expression neutral, though anger sparked in her chest. "Thank you for the concern, but I'm not Sarah." "No, you don't look like you bruise as easy." Caroline's smile turned genuine, almost approving. "Maybe you'll do better than the rest of us." Before Eliza could respond, Caleb appeared at her elbow. "Ready?" She nodded, and they left the store with Caroline's words hanging in the air between them like smoke. They spent the rest of the day in town, buying chickens from a suspicious Jensen who tried to charge double until Caleb stared him down, then hauling lumber from the mill where Harrison turned out to be less of a thief than advertised. By the time they loaded everything onto a borrowed wagon and headed home, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, and Eliza's body was reminding her of yesterday's fence work. "Caroline Webb cornered me in the store," she said as they rode. Caleb's expression didn't change. "She say something?" "Warned me you were cold. Said Sarah went mad from loneliness." "Sarah went mad because she expected something I couldn't give her." His voice was flat. "She wanted a different life than the one we had. Wanted me to be someone I'm not." "What did she want?" "Conversation, affection, someone who'd sit with her in the evenings instead of working until dark." He looked straight ahead. "I tried, but I'm not built that way. Ranch comes first, always has to." Eliza absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "I'm not asking you to change, but I'm also not Sarah. I don't need constant attention. I need honesty and respect. You'll get both. Then we'll be fine." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're sure about that?" "No, but I'm sure I'm going to try." They worked into the evening rebuilding the chicken coop. Caleb cut lumber while Eliza held board steady and learned to use a square to check corners. Her hands were bleeding again by the time they finished, blisters on top of blisters, but the coop stood solid and the new chickens were safely inside, clucking their displeasure at being relocated. "That'll do," Caleb said, stepping back to survey their work. "Should keep the coyotes out now." Eliza looked at the coop, then at her ruined hands, then at the man standing beside her covered in sawdust and sweat. Partners, he'd called them. And for the first time, she thought it might actually be true. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for letting me help, for teaching me." He nodded slowly. "You earned it." It wasn't flowery, wasn't romantic, but coming from him, it felt like something valuable. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Caleb would wake before dawn, start coffee, and leave for whatever work needed doing while Eliza learned to manage the house and garden. She'd collect eggs, feed chickens, haul water from the creek, and fight with the vegetable garden that seemed determined to grow everything except what she'd actually planted. In the afternoons, he'd come back and take her with him, checking cattle, riding fence lines, teaching her the 1,000 small skills that kept a ranch running. She learned to spot signs of illness in cattle, to track water sources, to read weather in the way clouds built on the horizon. Her body adapted slowly, painfully, to the physical demands. Her hands calloused, her skin darkened, and the soft Philadelphia seamstress began to feel like someone from a different life. On Thursday, Caleb rode out to check the north pasture and didn't return by dark. Eliza stood on the porch as full darkness fell, fighting the urge to panic. He'd said it might take all day, said not to worry if he was late. But the house felt too empty, and the night sounds of the prairie were still foreign and vaguely threatening. She was about to saddle Buck and go looking when she heard hoofbeats. Caleb rode in looking exhausted, his shirt torn and crusted with something dark. He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left side. "What happened?" "Found a steer caught in brush near the creek. Had to cut him out. Got kicked for my trouble." He lifted his shirt, revealing a livid bruise spreading across his ribs. "Nothing broken, just sore." Eliza came down the steps, her seamstress's eye assessing the damage. "You need that wrapped." "It's fine." "It's not fine. Sit down before you fall down." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he sat heavily on the porch step, and she realized just how tired he was. She fetched clean cloth from the house, tore it into strips with practiced efficiency, and wrapped his ribs tight enough to provide support, but not so tight he couldn't breathe. Her hands moved with certainty, and she was aware of his eyes on her face as she worked. "Where'd you learn to do this?" he asked. "My father broke his hand in the printing press when I was 12. Couldn't afford a doctor, so I learned from a medical book he had. Said it myself." She tied off the bandage. "It healed crooked, but it healed." "You never mentioned that." "You never asked." Caleb caught her wrist gently as she started to pull away. "Eliza." She looked at him. "Thank you." His hand was warm on her wrist, calloused and rough, but careful. and for just a moment the distance between them felt smaller. Not gone. She didn't fool herself that much. But smaller. "You're welcome," she said quietly. He released her and stood, wincing slightly. "I should get these horses put up." "I'll do it. You should rest." "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with the impulse to refuse help, to keep carrying everything alone the way he'd been doing for years. Then he nodded. "All right, thank you." She took care of both horses, the work coming easier now that she'd done it a dozen times. When she came back inside, Caleb was sitting at the table, staring at nothing, his face drawn with pain he was trying to hide. "You need food," she said. "Not hungry." "Eat anyway." She heated leftover stew and set it in front of him, and after a moment he picked up the spoon and ate mechanically. When he finished, she poured him coffee and sat down across from him. "Can I ask you something personal?" He looked wary. "Maybe." "Why do you push yourself so hard? Work from dawn until you can barely stand." Caleb was quiet for a long time, turning the coffee cup in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because if I stop, if I slow down, I might have to think about how lonely this all is. And thinking about that doesn't help anything." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "It doesn't have to be lonely anymore," Eliza said carefully. "We're getting married in 2 days. That means something, even if it started as practicality." "Does it? To you?" She considered the question. "I don't know yet, but I think it could, if we both let it." Caleb met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than careful control there, something uncertain and maybe even hopeful. "I'm not good at this," he said. "The talking, the closeness. Sarah used to say I had walls built so high she needed a ladder, just to see over them. I don't need you to tear down walls. I just need you to leave the door open sometimes." He nodded slowly. "I can try." "That's all I'm asking." Friday arrived with clear skies and the weight of what was coming tomorrow. Reverend Porter sent word he'd arrive by noon on Saturday, and suddenly the abstract idea of marriage became a concrete event rushing toward them. Eliza spent the morning cleaning the house with manic energy, trying to make the space feel less like Caleb's bachelor quarters and more like a home where two people might actually build a life together. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and even found wildflowers growing near the creek to put in a jar on the table. When Caleb came in for lunch, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the changes. "Place looks different. Better or worse?" "Better. Feels, lived in." "Good, because after tomorrow, it will be." He nodded, something complicated crossing his face. Then he said, "There's something I need to show you." He led her outside, past the barn, to a small plot of land enclosed by a simple wooden fence. Inside were 2 graves, marked with plain wooden crosses. One had a name carved into it, Sarah Rourke, 1854 to 1872. The other was blank. "That's where Sarah's buried," Caleb said, voice neutral. "The other one is for me, eventually. Had them both dug at the same time. Seemed practical." Eliza stared at the 2 graves, at this man who'd planned his own death with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, and felt her heart crack slightly. "That's the saddest thing I've ever seen. It's practical. It's lonely." She turned to face him. "You were so sure you'd die alone that you dug your own grave next to a woman who's been dead 3 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. "What else was I supposed to think? This land kills people. I've made my peace with that." "Well, I haven't made peace with it, and I'm not letting you give up before we've even started." She grabbed his hand, surprising them both. "You asked me to be your partner. Partners don't let each other dig graves and wait to fill them." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression shifting through emotions she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Sarah died because I couldn't save her, couldn't get help in time, couldn't do anything but watch her slip away. I won't survive going through that again." "Then don't go through it. Fight instead. With me. For this life we're trying to build. What if it's not enough? Then at least we tried together." Caleb's fingers tightened on hers, and she realized his hands were shaking slightly. This hard, controlled man who never showed weakness was coming apart at the seams. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to let someone in again?" "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out." She stepped closer. "Tomorrow we make promises in front of the whole town, but right now, here, can you promise me one thing?" "What?" "That you'll try, really try, not just to survive, but to live." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes, fear fighting against something that looked dangerously close to hope. "I'll try," he said finally. "That's all I need." They stood there in the shadow of those two graves, holding hands like children making a pact, and Eliza felt something shift. Not love. It was too soon for that, too fragile. But maybe the beginning of something that could become love, if they were both brave enough to let it grow. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb didn't immediately retreat to the bunkhouse after supper. Instead, he sat with her on the porch as the sun set, both of them silent, but somehow together in the silence. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "Terrified." He almost smiled. "Me too." "Really?" "Making promises is easy. Keeping them is what scares me." Eliza looked at this complicated, damaged man who'd opened his home to a stranger and was now trying to open something deeper. "Then we'll keep them together. When it gets hard, we'll remind each other why we started." "Why did you start? Really? Not the practical reasons, the real ones." She thought about Philadelphia, about the printing shop she'd lost when her father died, about the dress shop where she'd worked herself raw for a woman who'd never see her as more than hired help, about the future that had stretched ahead like a gray tunnel with no light at the end. "Because I was disappearing," she said quietly. "In Philadelphia, I was just hands that sewed and a voice that said, 'Yes, ma'am.' Nobody saw me. And I realized if I stayed, I'd wake up one day and not even see myself anymore." Caleb nodded slowly. "I understand that." "Do you?" "Yeah. After Sarah died, I spent 2 years not talking to anyone unless I had to. Just me and the cattle and the work. Started forgetting what my own voice sounded like." He looked at her. "You reminded me I'm still a person, not just a pair of hands keeping a ranch running." "Good. Because you are a person. A stubborn, frustrating person who works too hard and talks too little. But a person." This time, the smile was real, brief but genuine. "You're stubborn yourself." "I know. We're going to drive each other crazy." "Probably." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the prairie and stars began appearing in impossible numbers overhead. And Eliza thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be all right. Tomorrow, they'd make it official. But tonight, sitting beside this quiet man under a sky full of stars, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Saturday morning arrived too fast and too slow at the same time. Eliza woke before dawn to find Caleb already gone, though he'd left fresh coffee and a note that said simply, "Back by 10." She stood in the quiet house, still wearing the nightgown she'd brought from Philadelphia, and felt the full weight of what was about to happen settle over her like a heavy coat. In a few hours, she'd be married, legally bound to a man she'd known for less than a week, standing in front of a town that had already judged her before she'd even arrived. Her hands were shaking when she poured the coffee. The dress hung on a peg in the bedroom, the only decent thing she owned, a deep blue cotton she'd made herself 2 years ago. It wasn't white, wasn't fancy, but it was clean and well made, and it would have to be enough. She was pinning up her hair when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses. Eliza went to the window and felt her stomach drop. At least a dozen people were riding up to the house, some in wagons, others on horseback, and more were visible in the distance, kicking up dust on the road from town. The wedding party had arrived early. She wasn't ready, wasn't dressed, wasn't prepared for the scrutiny of all those eyes. A knock on the door made her jump. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and opened it to find Martha Pruitt standing there with another woman Eliza didn't recognize. "Thought you might need help getting ready," Martha said, already pushing past into the house. "This is Ellen Morrison. She's been in Redemption almost as long as I have, which makes us practically ancient." Ellen was younger than Martha, maybe 40, with kind eyes and capable hands. She carried a basket that smelled like fresh bread. "Figured you wouldn't have time to cook today." Ellen said, setting the basket on the table. So I brought breakfast and lunch, and probably supper too, knowing how these things go. Eliza stood there in her nightgown and half-pinned hair, feeling exposed and grateful in equal measure. Thank you. I wasn't expecting— No one ever is, Martha cut in. Now go get dressed before the whole town shows up and sees you looking like you just rolled out of bed. The authority in her voice sent Eliza back to the bedroom, where she finished with her hair and pulled on the blue dress. Her hands were still shaking, and she had to try 3 times to fasten the tiny buttons at her wrists. When she emerged, the main room had transformed. Ellen had laid out food on the table, Martha had swept the floor and opened the windows to let in fresh air, and both women were arranging wildflowers in jars with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Better, Martha said, looking Eliza over. You look scared half to death, but at least you're dressed for it. I am scared half to death. Good. Shows you've got sense. Martha adjusted one of the flowers. Marriage is terrifying. Anyone who says different is either lying or stupid. Ellen laughed. She's not wrong. I cried through my whole wedding, and I actually loved Robert when I married him. Do you still love him? Eliza asked. Most days. Other days I want to brain him with a frying pan. Ellen smiled. That's marriage. You'll figure it out. More people arrived. Men Eliza assumed were neighboring ranchers, their wives dressed in their best clothes, a handful of children running wild in the yard. They came bearing food, well-wishes, and barely concealed curiosity about the mail-order bride who'd come all the way from Philadelphia to marry Caleb Rourke. Caroline Webb appeared with her husband, a thin man with a permanent squint and hands that never stopped moving. She gave Eliza a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Big day, Caroline said. You holding up? Barely. That's honest, at least. She lowered her voice. My advice? Don't let them see you crack. This town loves nothing better than watching someone fall apart. Before Eliza could respond, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Caleb had returned, riding in with another man Eliza didn't recognize. He dismounted stiffly, clearly favoring his injured ribs, and caught sight of the crowd gathered in his yard. The expression on his face was somewhere between resignation and panic. He found Eliza through the window, their eyes meeting across the distance, and she saw her own fear reflected back at her. 2 people about to make promises they weren't sure they could keep, in front of an audience that expected them to fail. Martha noticed the exchange and made a satisfied noise. Well, at least you're both equally terrified. That's something. Reverend Porter arrived at noon, a stout man with a booming voice and an air of someone who'd seen enough frontier weddings to have stopped being surprised by anything. He sat up on the porch, Bible in hand, and called for everyone to gather around. Eliza stood in the doorway, unable to make her feet move forward. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. The moment where she either stepped into this new life completely or ran back to, what? Philadelphia? The dress shop? The slow disappearance she'd been so desperate to escape? You ready? She turned to find Caleb beside her, cleaned up but still looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd changed into what must be his best shirt, though it was still just a work shirt, and his hair was damp like he'd dunked his whole head in the water trough. No, she said honestly. Are you? No. He held out his hand. But we're doing it anyway. She took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength, the slight tremor that told her he was just as scared as she was. Then they walked out onto the porch together, facing the assembled crowd that had come to witness their leap into the unknown. Reverend Porter cleared his throat. We're gathered here today to join Caleb Rourke and Eliza Hartwell in matrimony. This is a sacred union, not to be entered into lightly, but with full understanding of the commitment being made. The words washed over Eliza like water. She was aware of Caleb's hand in hers, of the faces watching them, of the prairie wind pulling at her dress. But mostly, she was aware of the choice she was making with every second she stood there. Caleb Rourke, the Reverend continued, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, until death do you part? Caleb's jaw tightened. For a horrible moment, Eliza thought he might say no, might realize what a mistake this was and walk away, leaving her stranded in front of everyone. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "I do." His voice was steady, certain, and something in Eliza's chest loosened slightly. "Eliza Hartwell, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, until death do you part?" She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind, about standing in the rain that first day, ankle deep in mud, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. She thought about Caleb walking 6 miles so she could ride, about him teaching her to fix fences and saddle horses and survive in a place that didn't forgive weakness, about him sitting beside her last night under the stars, admitting he was scared. "I do," she said. The Reverend smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb looked mildly panicked by this suggestion. Eliza almost laughed, except she was equally panicked. They stood there for an awkward moment, clearly neither of them having thought this part through, until Martha called out from the crowd, "Oh, for heaven's sake, just kiss her already." Caleb's face went slightly red, but he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, brief, chaste, and somehow sweet in its complete lack of pretense. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was a kiss of partnership, of two people agreeing to try. The crowd erupted in applause and whoops, and suddenly they were surrounded by well-wishers slapping Caleb on the back and hugging Eliza and offering congratulations she could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. She was married, to a stranger, in Texas. The reality of it hit her all at once, and she had to grip Caleb's arm to keep from swaying. He noticed immediately. "You all right?" "I think so. Just a lot." "Yeah." He looked at the crowd, at the food being laid out on makeshift tables, at the celebration forming around them without their input. "They'll expect us to stay for a while. Eat, dance, probably. Can you manage it?" "Can you?" "I hate dancing." "Then we won't dance. We'll just survive it together." He nodded, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Together. Right." The celebration spilled across the yard and into the house, taking on a life of its own. Food appeared in quantities that seemed impossible. Roasted chickens, fresh bread, pies made with the last of someone's carefully hoarded dried fruit. Someone produced a fiddle and started playing, and the children immediately began a chaotic approximation of dancing. Eliza found herself swept into conversations with women whose names she'd never remember, all of them offering advice that ranged from practical to bizarre. Ellen told her the best way to get bloodstains out of work shirts. Caroline warned her about scorpions in the woodpile. Another woman, whose name Eliza had already forgotten, gave detailed instructions for making soap that involved lye and pig fat and sounded like a recipe for disaster. Through it all, she kept catching glimpses of Caleb standing with the men, looking deeply uncomfortable as they talked around him. He wasn't participating much, just nodding occasionally and drinking coffee that must be cold by now. But every few minutes, his eyes would find hers across the chaos, checking to make sure she was all right. It was the most attention he'd paid her all week, and it made something warm bloom in her chest. As afternoon bled into evening, people started gathering their children and hitching up wagons, making noises about heading home before dark. Martha found Eliza as she was saying goodbye to yet another well-wisher. "You did good today," Martha said. "Didn't let them see you panic, even though I know you were." "How could you tell?" "You had that look, like a rabbit trying to decide whether to bolt." Martha glanced over at Caleb, who was helping someone load their wagon. "He had it too. You're well matched that way. In our mutual terror, in your mutual stubbornness. You both decided to do this thing, and you're both too proud to admit if it was a mistake." Martha's expression softened slightly. "That stubbornness will serve you well out here. This land respects stubborn. Thank you for everything, for helping me get ready, for—" Eliza's throat tightened. "For not treating me like an outsider." "You are an outsider. For now." Martha patted her arm. "But give it time. You'll either become one of us or you'll leave. Either way, we'll know soon enough." It wasn't exactly comforting, but it was honest, and Eliza had learned to value honesty over comfort. As the last of the guests departed, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that hurt to look at. Caleb stood beside her on the porch, watching the wagons disappear down the road in clouds of dust. "That wasn't as bad as I expected," he said finally. "It wasn't good either." "No." He looked at her. "But we got through it." "We did." They stood in silence as full darkness fell and the first stars appeared. The house behind them was a mess of dirty dishes and half-eaten food and clear evidence that 24 people had trampled through it. Eliza knew she should go inside and start cleaning, knew there was work to be done, but she couldn't make herself move. Couldn't quite process that this day was over and the rest of her life had officially begun. "Eliza?" She looked at him. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse tonight. Give you time to adjust." Something sharp twisted in her chest. Disappointment, though she couldn't quite articulate why. They'd agreed this was practical, not romantic. Agreed to take things slow. But they were married now. And him walking away on their wedding night felt like a rejection, even if it was meant as kindness. "You don't have to," she said carefully. "We're married. It's expected." "I'm not going to expect anything from you that you're not ready for." His voice was firm. "We'll figure that part out when we're both ready. No rush." She should have been relieved. Should have appreciated his consideration, but instead she felt something crack inside her. The brittle shell of pretending everything was fine when nothing felt fine at all. "When will we be ready?" The words came out sharper than intended. "A week? A month? A year? How long are we going to keep pretending this is anything other than two scared people who made a deal and are now stuck with each other?" Caleb's expression shuddered. "I thought this was what you wanted. Practical. No expectations." "It is what I wanted. What I still want." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. But standing there today, making those promises in front of everyone, it felt real. Like maybe we were building something that mattered, and now you're walking away again, and I'm back to being alone in this house, and I don't know what we're supposed to be to each other. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Caleb said, quiet and raw, "I don't know either. I'm trying to do the right thing here, but I don't know what that is. With Sarah, I pushed too fast, expected too much, and she—" He stopped, jaw working. "I can't make that mistake again. I'm not Sarah. I know that. Do you? Because it feels like you're so afraid of repeating the past that you won't even try for a future." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Eliza immediately wanted to take them back. But they were true, and she was tired of dancing around truth. Caleb looked at her with something that might have been hurt or anger or both. Then he said, "You're right. I am afraid. This whole thing terrifies me. You terrify me." "I terrify you?" "You walked into my life 7 days ago and turned everything upside down. Made me remember what it feels like to want something other than just surviving. And that scares the hell out of me because wanting things out here is how you get your heart ripped out." Eliza felt her anger drain away, replaced by something softer and more dangerous. "We're both scared. That's the only honest thing either of us has admitted all day. So what do we do about it?" "I don't know." She looked up at the stars, at the vast, indifferent sky. "But I know we can't keep walking away from each other every time it gets uncomfortable. We're married now. We're stuck." Stuck. He said it like he was testing the word. That's one way to put it. "What would you call it?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Bound. For better or worse, like the Reverend said. We're bound to each other now." "And that terrifies you?" "Yeah, it does." He met her eyes. "But maybe that's not entirely bad. Being terrified means you care whether you survive. I stopped caring about that after Sarah died. Just went through the motions. But you make me want to care again." Eliza's throat felt tight. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. That's pathetic." "It is a little." She managed a small smile. "But it's honest, and I'll take honest over pretty words any day." They stood there on the porch, married strangers trying to figure out how to be something more, and Eliza felt the first fragile thread of real connection forming between them. Not love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of love, if they could both be brave enough. Stay, she said quietly. In the house. Not for anything you're not ready for. Just stay. Sleep on the floor if you want, but don't walk away again. Caleb looked torn, every instinct clearly telling him to retreat to the safety of distance. Then he nodded. All right, I'll stay. They went inside together, and Caleb helped her clean up the remains of the celebration while neither of them mentioned the elephant in the room, the fact that there was only one bed and they were both going to have to figure out how to navigate this new reality. When the kitchen was finally clean, Caleb stood awkwardly by the door to the bedroom. I can take the floor, or the couch out here. The bed is big enough for both of us. We're adults. Eliza tried to sound more confident than she felt. We can share a bed without anything happening. You sure? No, but I'm sure I don't want you sleeping on the floor in your own house on our wedding night. He nodded slowly, and they went through the strange ritual of getting ready for bed with another person present for the first time. Caleb turned his back while Eliza changed into her nightgown. She did the same while he stripped down to his undershirt and trousers. They moved around each other with exaggerated politeness, like strangers in a too small space. When they finally settled into bed, Caleb on one side, Eliza on the other, a careful foot of space between them, the awkwardness was almost unbearable. This is weird, Caleb said into the darkness. Very weird. We don't have to. I know, we're just sleeping. Right, just sleeping. Another long silence. Then Eliza started laughing, quiet and helpless, at the sheer absurdity of it all. After a moment, Caleb joined her, and the sound of their combined laughter broke something in the tension. We're terrible at this, Eliza said, when she could breathe again. The worst. Caleb's voice held something that might have been a smile. But at least we're terrible at it together. Together. I'm going to hold you to that. I know. Eventually, exhaustion won out over awkwardness, and Eliza felt herself drifting toward sleep. She was almost gone when she felt Caleb's hand find hers in the darkness, tentative, asking permission without words. She squeezed back, holding on like an anchor, and heard his breathing slow and deepen as he finally relaxed. They fell asleep that way, holding hands across the careful distance, two people learning how to be bound instead of alone. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the particular quality of light that said the day was already warming up. Eliza woke to find herself curled against Caleb's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her like it belonged there. For a moment she froze, not sure how they'd ended up tangled together when they'd started so carefully apart. Then Caleb's voice rumbled under her ear. You're awake. Yeah. We should probably. Neither of them moved. This all right? He asked quietly. Eliza considered lying, maintaining the careful distance they'd tried to preserve. Then she decided she was tired of lying to both of them. Yeah, it's all right. His arm tightened slightly around her, and they lay there for a few more minutes, pretending they had time to waste, before the demands of the ranch pulled them back to reality. When they finally got up, moving through the morning routine with less awkwardness than the night before, Eliza caught Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? Nothing. Just, this feels different than before. Better or worse? Different. Not sure yet. He pulled on his boots. I need to check the cattle in the north pasture. Should be back by noon. I'll come with you. He looked surprised. You don't have to. Plenty to do here. I know, but we're partners, remember? And I want to learn. Something shifted in his face. Approval, maybe, or respect. All right then, saddle up. They rode out together as the sun climbed higher, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now, this man, this land, this hard, beautiful country that didn't forgive mistakes. And she was going to make it work. Not because it would be easy, but because she'd promised she would try. The north pasture was 3 miles from the house, across rolling hills and through a creek that ran cold and clear. Caleb led them to a section of land where the cattle grazed in loose groups, their red hides stark against the green grass. See that bull? Caleb pointed to a massive animal standing apart from the herd. That's Duke, best breeding bull I've got. Temperamental as hell, but he produces strong calves. He's huge. Yeah, and mean. You stay clear of him. He's gored 2 men that I know of, and he'd do it again without thinking twice. Eliza studied the bull, noting the way it pawed at the ground and swung its massive head from side to side. There was something unsettling about all that contained violence. Why keep him if he's dangerous? Because he's worth it. Good genetics matter more than good temper in this business. Caleb urged his horse forward. Come on, let's check the fence line. They rode the perimeter of the pasture, and Caleb pointed out things Eliza was learning to recognize. Signs of weakness in the fence, areas where water collected and would need drainage, the subtle indicators that told him which cows were pregnant and which weren't. She absorbed it all, filing away information for later when she'd need to know these things herself. They were checking the far corner when they heard it. A sound somewhere between a bellow and a scream, followed by panicked movement from the herd. Caleb's head snapped up. Something's wrong! He spurred Ginger into a gallop, and Eliza followed on Buck, her heart already racing. As they crested a rise, she saw it. Duke had gotten into the corral somehow, and he was destroying everything in reach. Fence rails splintered under his horns. The wooden gate hung in pieces. And in the middle of the chaos, the bull was fixated on something in the corner. Caleb swore viciously. He's after the calves. If he kills them. He didn't finish the sentence, just rode straight at the bull, yelling and waving his hat to draw its attention away from the terrified calves pressed against the fence. It worked too well. Duke's head swung toward Caleb, and Eliza saw the exact moment the animal decided what to do about this new threat. It lowered its massive head and charged. Everything happened in fragments, too fast to process whole. Caleb trying to wheel Ginger out of the way. The bull hitting the horse's hindquarters, sending both horse and rider flying. Caleb hitting the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Duke turning, gathering itself for another charge. Eliza didn't think, just acted. She rode Buck straight at the bull, screaming at the top of her lungs, making herself as big and loud and threatening as possible. The bull hesitated, confused by this new target. It was enough. Caleb rolled to his feet and ran, not away from the bull, but toward the fence, grabbing a broken rail and using it to vault over just as Duke's horn slammed into the wood where he'd been standing a second before. Eliza kept riding, kept yelling, kept the bull's attention on her as Buck danced and wheeled, responding to her panicked commands with the kind of grace she didn't know she had in her. Then Caleb was on the other side of the fence, shouting, "Get out! Now!" She turned Buck and rode for the gate, or what was left of it, and felt more than heard the bull thundering behind her. Buck surged forward, clearing the broken gate in a leap that left Eliza grabbing for the saddle horn, and they were out, safe, the fence between them and 2,000 pounds of furious animal. Eliza pulled Buck to a stop, her whole body shaking so hard she could barely stay in the saddle. Caleb ran to her, reaching up to pull her down, his hands running over her arms and shoulders like he was checking for injury. "Are you hurt? Did he get you?" I'm fine. She could barely get the words out through chattering teeth. You hit the ground hard." "I'm all right." But his face was white, and when he lowered his arms, she saw fresh blood soaking through his shirt at the ribs. The bandages she'd wrapped just days ago had torn open, and something worse had opened underneath. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. It's not nothing." She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the horses. "We need to get back to the house. Now." "The calves can wait. You're bleeding through your shirt and you just got thrown by a horse. Move." For once, he didn't argue. They mounted up and rode back to the ranch, and Eliza could see Caleb getting paler with every mile, his grip on the reins weakening as blood continued to seep through the fabric. By the time they reached the house, he was swaying in the saddle. Eliza helped him down, half carried him, really, and got him inside to the kitchen table. When she pulled up his shirt, her stomach dropped. The old wound from the cow had torn completely open, and a new gash ran alongside it, deep and ugly, welling blood with every breath he took. This wasn't something she could bandage and hope for the best. This needed real help. "I need to get the doctor," she said, already moving toward the door. Caleb's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "No time. Town's 6 miles. I'd bleed out before you got back." "Then what?" "You have to do it." His eyes met hers, clear despite the pain. "So it closed. Same as you did your father's hand. Eliza's blood turned to ice. That was a broken hand. This is... Caleb, I can't. You can. You have to. His grip tightened. I trust you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She looked at the wound, at the blood still flowing, at this man who'd become her husband just yesterday and was now asking her to save his life with nothing but threat and determination. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get real help, to not risk killing him through her own incompetence. But he was right. There wasn't time. So she swallowed her fear and said, "All right, don't move." Her sewing kit sat in the bedroom where she'd left it after mending a torn dress 2 days ago. Eliza grabbed it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, then filled a basin with water from the kettle, added whiskey from the bottle she'd seen Caleb use exactly once, and laid out everything on the table beside him. Needle, thread, clean cloth, whiskey for cleaning the wound and maybe for Caleb to drink if the pain got too bad. She looked at the supplies, then at the gaping wound, and felt her stomach turn. "I've never done this on a person who was awake," she said. "First time for everything." Caleb's attempt at humor fell flat. His face had gone gray, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. "Just do it fast. Don't think about it too much." "That's terrible advice." "It's all I've got." Eliza took a breath that didn't steady her at all, then picked up the cloth and dipped it in the whiskey water mixture. "This is going to hurt." "I know." She pressed the cloth to the wound, cleaning away blood and dirt, and Caleb's whole body went rigid. A sound escaped through his clenched teeth that wasn't quite a scream but wasn't far off. "Sorry, sorry." "Keep going." His voice came out strangled. "Don't stop." So she didn't. She cleaned the wound as thoroughly as she could, her stomach churning at the raw exposed flesh, at the way it pulled apart with each of his breaths. When she was satisfied, it was as clean as she could make it. She threaded the needle with hands that shook so badly, it took 3 tries. The needle was meant for fabric, fine cotton and silk, and the delicate work of hemming dresses. Not human skin, not closing a wound that could kill him if she did it wrong. Eliza. She looked up to find Caleb watching her, his eyes clearer than they should be given how much blood he'd lost. "You can do this," he said quietly. "I've seen you sew. Your hands are steady when you're focused. Just treat it like any other stitch." "It's not any other stitch, it's you." "Then do it for me, because if you don't, we're both going to have a real bad day." The dark humor helped somehow, made it feel less like she was about to cut into her husband and more like they were solving a problem together, partners, like they'd promised. Eliza positioned the needle at the edge of the wound, said a silent prayer to anyone who might be listening, and pushed it through. Caleb's hand slammed onto the table, fingers splayed, every muscle in his body going taut, but he didn't pull away. Didn't tell her to stop. She pulled the thread through, brought the edges of the wound together, and made another stitch, then another. Each one felt like it took an hour, though it was probably only seconds. Her whole world narrowed to the wound, the needle, the thread pulling flesh together in a line that looked clumsy and crude but held. "Talk to me," Caleb said through gritted teeth. "Need distraction." "About what?" "Anything. Your life before, Philadelphia. Something other than this." Eliza made another stitch, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "My father owned a printing shop. Small place, but he loved it. Taught me to set type when I was 6 years old." "Why'd you leave?" "He died. Heart stopped one day while he was running the press. Just stopped." Another stitch. The wound was slowly closing. "I tried to keep the shop going, but I was 22 and no one would do business with a woman printer. Lost it within a year." "That's when you went to the dress shop?" "Yeah. Mrs. Duval took pity on me, I think. Gave me work even though I wasn't trained proper. Turns out sewing and printing press work use similar hand skills." She paused, needle halfway through the next stitch. "I was good at it, really good. But I was never going to be anything more than hired help. Never going to own anything, build anything, just exist." "So you left?" "So I left." The next stitch pulled tighter than the others, and Caleb made a sound that told her she'd hurt him. "Sorry." "It's fine. Keep talking." "There's not much else to tell. I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides in the newspaper. Thought about it for 3 weeks. Then one day I just decided. Sold everything I owned, bought a ticket west, and here I am. Sewing up my husband of one day in a kitchen in Texas. Regret it? Eliza looked at him. At this stubborn, complicated man who'd trusted her with his life, who'd walked through rain and taught her to survive and was now letting her stitch him back together with shaking hands and determination. Ask me when I'm done, she said. The work continued in tense silence, broken only by Caleb's occasional sharp intake of breath when she hit a particularly tender spot. Sweat poured down both their faces. Blood kept welling up despite her efforts to stop it, and her hands cramped from the unfamiliar angle, from the tension of trying to be gentle and efficient at the same time. Halfway through, Caleb's hand found hers, the one not holding the needle, and gripped tight enough to hurt. Almost done, she lied, because they were maybe halfway, and she could see him fading, the pain and blood loss taking their toll. You're a terrible liar. I know. His thumb moved against her palm, a small gesture that felt enormous. For the record, I don't regret it either. Answering your letter, bringing you here. Any of it. Even this part? Especially this part. Because you didn't run. You could have. Should have, probably. But you're still here. Eliza's vision blurred and she blinked hard to clear it. Now was not the time for crying. She made another stitch, then another, working her way down the wound with aching slowness. By the time she tied off the final stitch, her hands were covered in blood and her whole body was shaking with exhaustion and leftover fear. The stitches looked awful, uneven and crude, nothing like the precise work she did on fabric. But they held. The wound was closed. Done, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb sagged against the table, his hand still gripping hers. You did it. I did it. She looked at her bloody hands, at the needle she'd just used to sew human flesh, and felt something break loose inside her. A laugh that was half sob escaped, then another, and suddenly she couldn't stop. Caleb pulled her down onto the chair beside him, wrapping his good arm around her while she shook apart. Hey, it's all right. You're all right. I just sewed you back together with dress thread. And you did a damn fine job of it. It looks terrible. It looks like you saved my life. That's all that matters. He pressed his face into her hair, and she felt him trembling too. Thank you. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, both of them dealing with the crash that came after crisis. Eventually, Eliza's breathing steadied enough for her to pull back and really look at him. You need to rest and drink water, and definitely not ride out to check on cattle for at least a week. A week? Caleb shook his head. I'll be fine in a few days. You will rest for a week or I'll sew you to the bed. Don't test me. I've got the skills now. Despite everything, he smiled. Yes, ma'am. She helped him to the bedroom, got him settled with pillows propped behind him so he could breathe easier, and brought him water that he drank in long, desperate gulps. Then she cleaned up the kitchen, scrubbing blood off the table and floor, while trying not to think too hard about what she'd just done. When she returned to check on him an hour later, he was asleep, his breathing deep and steady. She stood in the doorway watching him, this man who'd become her husband, her partner, her responsibility. The stitches across his ribs looked angry and red, but they held. That was something. The rest of the day passed in a strange fog. Eliza went through the motions of daily chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, hauling water, while part of her brain kept replaying the morning's events. The bull charging, Caleb falling, the blood, the needle pushing through flesh. She'd done it, actually done it, faced something that terrified her and didn't run. That night, she lay beside Caleb in the bed, careful not to jostle his injured side, and listened to him breathe. His hand found hers in the darkness, and she held on tight. You awake? He asked quietly. Yeah. Can't sleep? Can't stop thinking about today. He was quiet for a moment. Me either. Keep seeing that bull coming at me, feeling Ginger go down, then looking up and seeing you riding straight at 2,000 pounds of mean. I didn't think, just acted. You saved my life twice today. Once from the bull, once from bleeding out. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I owe you. We're partners. Partners don't keep score. Even so, he shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. I need you to know something. If this had gone different today, if I hadn't made it, everything here is yours. The ranch, the land, the cattle, all of it. I wrote it down after we got married, left the paper with Martha in town. Legal and witnessed. Eliza's throat tightened. When did you do that? Yesterday morning, before the ceremony. Figured you should have something to fall back on if things went bad. You were planning for your death the day we got married? I was planning for your survival. There's a difference. He turned his head to look at her in the darkness. This land kills people, Eliza. I've told you that. But if it takes me, I'm not letting it take everything you've worked for, too. You deserve better than that. She didn't know what to say. This man who claimed to be cold and closed off had spent their wedding morning making sure she'd be protected if he died, had trusted her with his life today, was lying here now, stitched together with dress thread, and thinking about her survival instead of his own pain. You're not going to die, she said firmly. I won't let you. You can't control everything. Watch me. He laughed, soft and pained. Yeah, I'm starting to believe you might actually mean that. They fell asleep holding hands again, and this time when Eliza woke in the middle of the night, tangled against his good side, she didn't pull away. Just settled closer and let herself feel the steady beat of his heart under her palm. Proof that he was alive, that they'd both survived. The next week was hard in ways Eliza hadn't anticipated. Caleb was a terrible patient, restless and stubborn and convinced he was well enough to work when he could barely stand without going pale. She had to physically block the door more than once to keep him from going out to check on cattle. You're going to tear those stitches, she said, arms crossed, standing between him and freedom. The fence in the south pasture needs repair. The fence can wait. You can't. I've been hurt worse than this and kept working. And look how well that turned out. She pointed at his bandaged ribs. You nearly died yesterday because you ignored an injury. I'm not letting you do it again. They stared at each other, wills clashing, until Caleb finally backed down. Fine, but I'm going crazy sitting here. Then sit here and go crazy. At least you'll be alive to complain about it. But she understood the restlessness. The ranch didn't stop needing work just because Caleb was injured. The cattle still needed checking. The fences still needed mending, and Eliza was only one person who'd been here less than 2 weeks, so she did what she could. Rose before dawn to feed chickens and collect eggs. Saddled Buck herself and rode out to check the nearest pastures, making mental notes of things that needed attention. Came back and tended the garden, hauled water, cooked meals for two, even though Caleb barely ate. At night, she'd collapse into bed beside him, muscles screaming, and he'd look at her with something that might have been guilt or respect or both. You're doing too much, he said one evening. I'm doing what needs doing. You're going to wear yourself out. Then I'll rest when you're healed. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off boots that had rubbed blisters into her heels. We're partners, remember? When you can't work, I work. When I can't work, you will. That's the deal. That wasn't the deal. The deal was I'd provide and you'd keep house. The deal changed when I had to sew you back together. She looked at him directly. I'm not just keeping house anymore, Caleb. I'm keeping this whole operation running, and I'm going to keep doing it until you're well enough to help again. Something shifted in his expression. You know what you're saying? If you can run the ranch without me, you don't need me. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Eliza stood, wincing at the protest from her sore muscles. I can run it because you taught me, because you trusted me enough to show me how everything works. That's not the same as not needing you. Then what do you need me for? The question hung in the air, vulnerable and real. Eliza thought about lying, about giving him the practical answer he probably expected. Then she remembered their promise to each other, truth instead of pretty words. I need you because this place feels less empty when you're in it, she said quietly. Because you make me laugh even when I'm exhausted. Because you hold my hand in the dark, and that makes the whole day worth surviving. She paused. And because somewhere in the last week, you stopped being a stranger I made a deal with and started being someone I actually care about. Caleb stared at her like she'd just spoken a foreign language. Then he said, rough and quiet, Come here. She went to him, letting him pull her down to sit beside him on the bed. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I care about you too," he said. "More than I thought I could. More than I wanted to, honestly." "Why didn't you want to?" "Because caring about people out here is dangerous. They leave or they die, and you're left with nothing but the hurt." His eyes met hers. "But you make me want to risk it anyway." Eliza leaned in and kissed him. Not the brief, awkward kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss. Slow and careful, and full of everything they'd been too scared to say out loud. When they pulled apart, Caleb was looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Probably have been since you rode at that bull without thinking twice. Maybe before that. I don't know. But I'm tired of pretending I'm not." The word should have scared her, should have felt too fast, too much, too soon after everything they'd been through. Instead, they felt right. "Good," she said, "because I'm falling too. And I was worried I was the only one stupid enough to do it." He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. "We're both idiots." "Completely." She kissed him again, gentler this time. "But we're idiots together." Over the next few days, something changed between them. Not dramatically. They still argued about whether Caleb was well enough to work and whether Eliza was taking on too much. Still moved around each other with occasional awkwardness. Still learning the rhythms of being married. But the walls were coming down. Slowly, brick by brick. Caleb told her about growing up in Missouri, about the father who'd taught him ranching and then lost everything in a bad winter, about coming to Texas with nothing but hope and stubbornness, about building this place from dirt and determination. Eliza told him about her mother who died when she was 10, about learning to be strong because there was no one else to be strong for her, about the dreams she'd had as a girl, owning her own business, being her own person, mattering to someone. They shared meals and stories and the slow work of healing, and at night they held each other in the darkness, no longer afraid to close the distance between them. A week after the bull attack, Caleb was finally strong enough to walk to the barn without going pale. Eliza went with him, ready to catch him if he stumbled, but he made it on his own. Inside the barn, they checked on the horses, and Caleb ran his hands over Ginger's hindquarters where the bull had hit her. "She's healing well," he said. "Better than me, probably. She didn't get gored, just bruised. Still, she went down hard." He leaned against the stall door, looking tired but determined. "We need to talk about Duke." Eliza felt her stomach tighten. "What about him?" "He's too dangerous. Should have put him down years ago, but I kept making excuses because he's valuable." Caleb looked at her. "He nearly killed us both. Nearly orphaned any kids we might have someday. Can't keep an animal like that around." "You're going to sell him?" "I'm going to shoot him." His voice was flat, final. "Tomorrow, before he hurts someone else." Eliza wanted to argue. Duke was worth money, was good genetics, was valuable to the ranch, but she kept seeing that moment when the bull charged, kept feeling the terror of watching Caleb go down. "All right," she said, but I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "I'm coming. We do this together." The next morning they rode out to the north pasture. Caleb carried his rifle, and Eliza carried the weight of understanding that sometimes survival meant making hard choices. Duke stood in the middle of the pasture, massive and mean, pawing at the ground like he was waiting for another chance to destroy something. Caleb dismounted carefully, his movements still stiff from healing. He loaded the rifle with steady hands, sighted down the barrel, and took the shot. It was clean, professional, over in seconds. The bull went down, and the rest of the herd scattered, then slowly returned to grazing like nothing had happened. Caleb lowered the rifle, his face expressionless, and Eliza went to stand beside him. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah, that was 2 years of work gone. 2 years of building the herd, improving the bloodline. All dead because I kept a dangerous animal around too long." "You made the right choice today. That's what matters." He nodded slowly, then turned to look at her. "We need to be smarter going forward, more careful. I can't risk losing you because I made a stupid decision." "You won't lose me. I'm tougher than I look." "I know, but this country doesn't care how tough you are. It'll take you anyway if you're not paying attention." He reached for her hand. "Promise me you'll be careful. that you'll think before riding at bulls or taking risks or doing anything that might get you hurt. Only if you promise the same thing. Deal. They stood there in the pasture, hands joined, looking at the dead bull and the living herd and the vast country stretching away in all directions. And Eliza felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her father died. This was her life now, her land, her partner, her future. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. As they rode back to the ranch, Caleb said, "I've been thinking. Dangerous activity for someone still healing." He ignored the jab. "About Sarah, about how I handled losing her. I shut down after she died, stopped talking to people, stopped trying to build anything beyond just surviving. And I think that was worse than the grief itself." Eliza waited, knowing he needed to work through this at his own pace. "What I'm trying to say is, I don't want to do that with you. Don't want to waste time being scared of losing what we're building." He glanced at her. "I want to actually try. For real this time. Not just partnership or practicality. I want more." "What kind of more?" "The kind where we build a real life together. Where we talk about having kids someday. Where we make plans past next season. Where we let ourselves be happy instead of just surviving." Eliza's throat felt tight. "I want that too." "Yeah? Yeah?" She smiled at him. "Though maybe wait until you're fully healed before we start working on the kids' part." He laughed, real and surprised. "Fair enough." They made it back to the ranch as the sun was climbing toward noon, and Eliza saw riders approaching from the direction of town. 3 of them, moving fast. Caleb tensed beside her. "That's Webb and Morrison, and someone else I don't recognize." They rode out to meet the group, and Eliza saw the looks on the men's faces, grim and worried. "Caleb," Robert Morrison said without preamble. "You heard about the Hendersons?" "No. What happened?" "Raiders hit them 2 nights ago. Took their horses, burned the barn, beat Henderson bad enough he's laid up at the docks. They're saying it's the same group that's been hitting ranches west of here for the past month." Caleb's whole body went rigid. "They heading this direction?" "Don't know. But we're organizing patrols, keeping watch. Wanted to warn everyone before they get caught unprepared." Morrison's eyes flicked to Eliza. "You might want to send your wife into town until this is settled." "No," Eliza said before Caleb could respond. "I'm staying." "Ma'am, these aren't ordinary thieves. They're violent, dangerous. I said I'm staying." She looked at Caleb. "This is my home. I'm not running from it." Caleb studied her face, probably seeing the same stubborn determination he'd shown her a dozen times. Then he nodded. "She stays, but we'll be ready if they come." The men discussed patrol schedules and warning systems, then rode off to spread the word to other ranches. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Eliza. "You should have gone to town. And leave you here alone, still healing, to fight off raiders if they come? Not a chance." "Eliza, we're partners," she interrupted. "We stand together. You said you wanted to really try, to build something real. This is what that looks like, standing together when it's dangerous, not just when it's safe." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw fear and pride fighting for dominance. Finally, he said, "All right, but we're doing this smart. I'm teaching you to shoot, and we're setting up defenses, and if they do come, you're not playing hero. Neither are you. Deal." They spent the afternoon preparing. Caleb showed her how to load and fire his rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze instead of jerking the trigger. She was terrible at first, missing the target by yards, but by the 20th shot she was hitting closer to center. "You're a natural," Caleb said, surprised. "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." They fortified the house, boarding up windows on the sides facing away from the approach, moving valuables inside, making sure they had water and supplies to last a siege if it came to that. Caleb was moving slower than normal, his ribs clearly bothering him, but he didn't stop until everything was secure. That night, they ate a quiet supper and went to bed early, both of them exhausted. But Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to every sound outside, imagining riders coming out of the night. "You scared?" Caleb's voice came soft beside her. "Terrified." "Me too." His hand found hers. But we're going to be all right. We've survived everything else thrown at us. We'll survive this too. Promise? Promise. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that their story wouldn't end with raiders in the night and everything they'd built burning down around them. But she'd learned enough about this country to know that wanting something didn't make it true. All they could do was prepare and wait and hope their stubborn determination was enough to carry them through whatever came next. 3 days passed without incident. 3 days of waiting, watching, jumping at every shadow. The neighboring ranchers rode patrol in rotating shifts, and Caleb joined them, despite Eliza's protests, his rifle across his saddle and his face set in grim determination. "You're still healing," she'd argued that first morning, "so I'll ride careful, but I'm not sitting here while other men defend my land." She'd wanted to keep fighting, but she understood. This was about more than physical capability. It was about standing with his neighbors, proving he was still part of the community even after shutting himself away for 3 years. So she let him go and spent her days keeping the ranch running and her nights listening for hoofbeats that never came. On the 4th day, Martha arrived in a wagon loaded with supplies, Ellen Morrison riding alongside her. "Figured you could use some company," Martha said, climbing down with a basket that smelled like fresh bread. "And maybe some news that isn't all doom and worry." They sat on the porch drinking coffee while Martha filled Eliza in on town gossip. The blacksmith's daughter was pregnant again. The saloon had gotten a new piano that no one could actually play. Someone had started a rumor that the railroad might extend a line through Redemption, though Martha gave that about as much credence as she gave the story about buried Confederate gold supposedly hidden somewhere in the hills. It was normal, ordinary, the kind of conversation that made the threat of raiders feel less immediate. "How are you holding up?" Ellen asked when Martha paused for breath. "I'm managing." "That's not what I asked." Eliza looked at these two women who'd shown her more kindness than she'd expected and felt something crack. "I'm terrified. I keep thinking about what happened to the Hendersons, keep imagining it happening here. And Caleb's still hurt, still healing, and he's out there riding patrol like he's invincible." "Men are idiots about that kind of thing," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Think if they admit they're scared or hurt, they'll somehow be less of a man. My Henry's the same way. Broke his leg 2 winters ago and tried to keep working on it until it healed crooked. Robert once stitched up his own hand rather than admit he needed help," Ellen added. "Men!" Despite everything, Eliza laughed. "Caleb would have stitched himself up too if he could have reached. Instead, he made me do it." "And you did?" "With dress thread and shaking hands. Nearly threw up twice." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Well, that explains why half the town is saying you're either the bravest woman in Texas or the craziest." "Probably both." They spent the afternoon together, and Eliza realized how much she'd needed this, the company of women who understood what it meant to build a life in a place that didn't make it easy. They shared stories and complaints, and small pieces of wisdom that wouldn't mean anything to someone who hadn't lived this life. How to keep scorpions out of your boots. The best way to preserve vegetables through winter. Which plants near the creek could be used for medicine and which ones would kill you if you brewed them wrong. When they finally left as the sun was dropping toward the horizon, Ellen hugged Eliza tight and whispered, "You're going to be fine. You're tougher than you think." "I don't feel tough." "None of us do, but we keep going anyway. That's what makes us tough." Caleb returned an hour after they'd left, looking exhausted but unharmed. Eliza met him at the door with coffee and supper already warming on the stove. "Anything happen?" she asked. "Nothing. Morrison thinks maybe they moved on to easier targets further west." He sat heavily at the table, wincing as the movement pulled at his ribs. "Or maybe they're just waiting us out. Hard to say." "How long do we keep up the patrols?" "Until we're sure they're gone. Or until they show up and we deal with them." He looked at her over his coffee cup. "Martha and Ellen come by?" "Yeah, brought food and gossip and reminders that I'm not alone out here." "Good. You need that. Friends, I mean." He paused. "I should have made more effort to stay connected to the community after Sarah died. Would have made things easier for both of us." "You're making effort now. That counts." They ate in comfortable silence, and Eliza found herself studying him. The way exhaustion had settled into the lines around his eyes. The careful way he moved to protect his injured side. the quiet strength that kept him going even when he was running on empty. She loved him. The realization hit her with surprising clarity, though maybe it shouldn't have been surprising at all. Somewhere between sewing him together and standing beside him against threats both animal and human, between sharing a bed and sharing their fears, she'd fallen completely. "What?" Caleb asked, noticing her stare. "Nothing, just thinking." "About?" "About how I got lucky. Answering your advertisement, coming here, getting you." His expression softened. "I'm the one who got lucky. You know that, right? We're both lucky then." "Yeah." He reached across the table to take her hand. "We are." That night, the raiders came. Eliza woke to the sound of horses and shouting, Caleb already out of bed and grabbing for his rifle. She scrambled up, heart hammering, and ran to the window. 4 riders, maybe 5, circling the yard with torches held high. One of them was trying to force open the barn door while another smashed at the chicken coop with what looked like an axe handle. "Stay inside," Caleb ordered, moving toward the door. "Like hell." Liza grabbed the shotgun they'd left loaded by the door. "We do this together, remember?" He looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The barn door splintered open, and they could hear the horses inside screaming in panic. Caleb kicked open the front door and fired a warning shot into the air. "Get off my land!" The riders wheeled around, and in the torchlight Eliza could see their faces. Hard men with harder eyes, the kind who'd learned that taking was easier than earning. One of them laughed. "Or what, old man? You gonna shoot all of us?" "If I have to." "Your funeral." It happened fast. The lead rider spurred his horse forward, pulling a pistol from his belt. Caleb fired, and the man went down, his horse bolting. The others scattered, 2 heading for the barn while another circled around toward the house. Eliza saw him coming, saw him raising his gun toward Caleb's exposed back, and didn't think. Just raised the shotgun the way Caleb had taught her, breathed out, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her off her feet, and the shot went wide. But it was close enough to make the rider's horse rear. He fought for control, and Caleb spun, taking the opportunity to fire again. This shot didn't miss. The rider fell, and his horse ran off into the darkness. The remaining 2 raiders made for the barn, probably thinking they could grab the horses and run. But they'd reckoned without Buck and Ginger, who weren't about to let strangers drag them out of their stalls. Eliza heard shouting, then a scream, then the sound of hooves connecting with flesh. One raider stumbled out of the barn, clutching his arm. The other didn't come out at all. The injured man looked at his fallen companions, at Caleb standing on the porch with his rifle ready, at Eliza reloading the shotgun with shaking hands, and made the smart choice. He ran for his horse and rode off into the night. Then it was over. Just like that. Maybe 3 minutes from start to finish, and the yard was littered with bodies and broken fence rails and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Eliza's hand started shaking so hard she nearly dropped the shotgun. Caleb took it from her gently, set it aside, and pulled her against him. "You all right?" "I shot at someone." "I know. I could have killed him." "But you didn't. You just scared him enough to miss me." His arms tightened around her. "You saved my life." Again. She was shaking too hard to respond, so she just held on and tried to remember how to breathe. Riders approached from the direction of town, the patrol, responding to the gunfire. Morrison and Webb, and 6 others, all armed and ready for trouble they'd arrived too late to stop. They helped deal with the aftermath. 2 dead raiders in the yard, 1 dead in the barn from Buck's hooves, and bloodstains leading off into the darkness where the 4th man had fled. Morrison sent someone to fetch the sheriff, while the others helped secure the property and calm the panicked animals. "You did good," Morrison told Caleb as they dragged the bodies away from the house. "Real good. Held them off until help could come." "Wasn't me." Caleb gestured toward Eliza, who was sitting on the porch steps trying to stop shaking. "She's the one who kept me from getting shot in the back." Morrison looked at her with new respect. "Mail-order bride with a shotgun. Town's going to talk about this for years." "Let them talk," Eliza said quietly, "as long as we're alive to hear it." The sheriff arrived at dawn, a tired man with a badge that looked too heavy for his shoulders. He took statements, examined the bodies, and pronounced the whole thing a clear case of self-defense. They've been hitting ranches from here to San Antonio, he said. You two might have just ended their run. The one that got away won't be able to operate alone. Good, Caleb said flatly. After everyone left, they stood in the yard surveying the damage. The chicken coop was destroyed again. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and there were bullet holes in the porch that would need patching, but the house still stood. The horses were safe, and they were both alive. We should get some sleep, Caleb said, though it was already full morning. I don't think I can sleep. Me either. He looked at her. You want to talk about it? What happened? I don't know what to say. I saw him going for you and I just reacted. Didn't think about whether I could actually hit him or what would happen if I did. Just pulled the trigger. That's what surviving looks like out here. Not thinking, just doing what needs done. He touched her face gently. I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson. I'm not. Better to learn it and live than hesitate and die. When did you get so practical about violence? When I married a rancher in Texas. She managed a weak smile. You're a terrible influence. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the morning light, holding each other while the sun climbed higher and the world slowly returned to normal around them. The weeks that followed were a study in healing, both the land and the people on it. They rebuilt the chicken coop, stronger this time, fixed the barn door, patched the bullet holes, and slowly, carefully, let go of the fear that had gripped them since the night the raiders came. Caleb's ribs finally healed completely, the stitches dissolving and leaving behind a scar that Eliza traced sometimes in the darkness, remembering the day she'd sewn him together with shaking hands. Does it hurt? She asked one night. Not anymore. Just itches sometimes. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against the scar. It's a good reminder. Of what? That I'm not invincible. That I need to be smarter about taking risks. That I have someone who'll patch me up when I'm too stubborn to quit. You're still too stubborn. Yeah, but now I'm stubborn with backup. Summer deepened into fall, and the ranch settled into rhythms they'd built together. Eliza learned to rope cattle well enough to help with the branding. Caleb taught her to read the weather in the morning sky, to know when storms were coming before the first cloud appeared. They worked side by side, and in the evenings they'd sit on the porch watching the sunset, comfortable in the silence they'd earned. One afternoon in late September, Eliza was working in the garden when she heard riders approaching. She looked up to find Martha and Ellen in the wagon, along with Caroline Webb and two other women she recognized from town. We're starting a school, Martha announced without preamble. Town's grown enough that we've got near 20 children who need educating, and none of us have time to teach them proper. Figured we'd pool resources, hire a teacher, build a schoolhouse. Huh? That's wonderful, Eliza said, wiping dirt from her hands. How can I help? We need fundraising and planning and someone who can actually read and write better than the rest of us. Martha gave her a pointed look. Ellen says you worked in a printing shop. That true? My father owned one. I learned to set type and edit copy before I could properly spell my own name. Perfect. You're on the planning committee. And just like that, Eliza found herself part of something bigger than the ranch. They met once a week at Martha's store, plotting and scheming and slowly bringing together a community that had been too scattered to cohere before. The school became real one board at a time, one fundraiser at a time. Eliza wrote letters to churches back east asking for book donations. Caroline organized a barn dance that raised enough money to hire a teacher. Ellen convinced her husband to donate lumber. And slowly, impossibly, a building took shape on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a roof, and windows that let in light. But it was theirs, built by women who'd decided their children deserved better than ignorance. The day the school opened, Caleb rode into town with Eliza, both of them dressed in their best clothes. The whole community turned out, ranchers and shopkeepers and farmers from outlying properties, all gathered to watch their children file into a building that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Reverend Porter said a few words. Martha gave a speech about the importance of education, and then the new teacher, a young woman from St. Louis with more courage than sense, rang the bell and called the children inside. Eliza stood with Caleb, watching this thing she'd helped build become real, and felt tears prick at her eyes. You did this, Caleb said quietly. We did it. All of us. But you made it happen. organized it, pushed it forward when everyone else would have given up. He took her hand. You're changing this place, making it better. I'm just trying to contribute, build something that lasts. You're doing more than that. You're giving these kids a future. He paused. Someday, our kids will walk through that door, learn in a school their mother helped create. Eliza looked at him, heart skipping. Our kids? Yeah, I mean, if you... He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. We haven't talked about it, but I've been thinking about what comes next, about building a family, not just a ranch. I've been thinking about it too, she admitted, hoping, maybe, that we could have that. Then let's have it. Not right away. We can wait until you're ready. But someday, a family. Kids running through that garden you hate so much, teaching them to ride and rope and survive this country. And to read and think and question everything. That too. He smiled. They'll be stubborn as hell between the two of us. Probably insufferable. Definitely. He pulled her closer. But they'll be ours. As fall turned to winter, the ranch thrived in ways Caleb hadn't seen in years. The herd grew strong and healthy. The garden produced enough vegetables to last through the cold months, with plenty left over to sell in town. And the house that had felt so empty when Eliza first arrived now felt full of life and possibility. They celebrated their first real Christmas together with Martha and Henry, Ellen and Robert, and half a dozen other families from neighboring ranches. The house was packed, loud with conversation and laughter, and Caleb stood in the doorway watching it all with an expression Eliza had never seen on him before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. You all right? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Yeah, this is what I wanted when I built this place. Community, people, life. He looked at her. You brought that back to me. We brought it back to each other. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were cleaning up the remains of the celebration, Caleb pulled something from his pocket. I made you something for Christmas. He held out a small wooden box, rough-hewn but carefully made. Inside was a simple ring, silver, with a small blue stone set in the center. It's not much, he said quickly. Had the blacksmith make it from a piece of silver I've been saving. The stone is from the creek. Thought it matched your eyes. Eliza felt her throat close up. When did you do this? Been planning it for weeks. Wanted you to have something that wasn't practical, something just because. He took the ring from the box. We got married fast, out of necessity. But this is me choosing you, wanting you, asking if you'll stay not because you have to, but because you want to. She held out her hand, steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Yes. Always yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like he'd somehow known exactly what size to make it. Then he kissed her, slow and deep and full of everything they'd built together. I love you, he said against her lips. Should have said it weeks ago, months ago maybe. But I'm saying it now. I love you too, even when you're stubborn and impossible and working yourself half to death. Especially then? Especially then. Winter was hard, the way winters in Texas could be. Freezing rain and bitter winds that cut through everything. But the house stayed warm, and they stayed together, and somehow that made even the worst days bearable. Eliza taught Caleb to read better. He could manage basics, but she helped him work through actual books, stumbling over words until they became familiar. In return, he taught her everything he knew about ranching, until she could manage the operation as well as he could. They became true partners in every sense of the word, sharing work and worry, success and failure, the mundane details, and the moments of grace that made the hard parts worthwhile. Spring arrived with new calves and green grass and the particular quality of light that said the world was waking up again. Eliza stood in the garden one morning, hands on her lower back, feeling the unfamiliar weight she'd been carrying for the past few months. She was pregnant. 3 months along, according to her best guess, though there was no doctor close enough to confirm it. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell Caleb, but kept finding reasons to delay. Fear, mostly. Fear of something going wrong. Fear of not being strong enough. Fear of all the ways this country could take away the things you loved most. But she was tired of being afraid. That evening, when Caleb came in from checking the herd, she met him at the door with news instead of supper. I need to tell you something. He froze, reading her expression. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is. She took his hand and pressed it against her belly, where the smallest curve had started to show. We're having a baby, sometime around September, if I'm counting right. Caleb stared at her, at his hand on her stomach, at the future suddenly made real. Then a smile broke across his face, huge and unguarded and so full of happiness it hurt to look at. Really? Really? He swept her up, careful despite his excitement, and spun her around once before setting her down and immediately looking worried. Should I have done that? Did I hurt you? I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I know, but... He stopped, laughed at himself. I'm going to be insufferable about this, aren't I? Completely. But I'll love you anyway. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Eliza felt something settle deep in her bones. This was what she'd come here looking for. Not just survival, but life. Real, messy, beautiful life. The pregnancy was harder than she'd expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible. And the constant low-level fear that something would go wrong, that she'd lose this child the way Sarah had lost hers in this unforgiving place. But Caleb was there. Every morning, every evening, taking on more of the work so she could rest. Bringing her water and crackers when the nausea got bad. Sitting with her in the darkness when the fear got too heavy to carry alone. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked one night. You're the strongest person I know. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it together, but nothing's going to go wrong. You're healthy, the baby's healthy, and we've got Martha and Ellen watching over you like mother hens. What if I'm a terrible mother? Impossible. You'll be stubborn and practical and probably make our kid stronger than both of us combined. He took her hand. And I'll be right there with you, figuring it out as we go. The reassurance helped, not completely, but enough. Summer arrived hot and relentless, and Eliza grew larger and more uncomfortable with each passing week. The women from town took turns visiting, bringing supplies and advice, and the particular comfort that came from others who'd survived this journey before. Martha showed her how to make a sling for carrying an infant while still being able to work. Ellen knitted blankets and tiny clothes that made the baby feel more real. Caroline, surprisingly, was the one who talked her through the fear, sharing her own story of difficult births and hard-won survival. You'll be all right, Caroline said, sitting on the porch while Eliza tried to find a comfortable position. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for, and you've got people now. That matters more than you know. Thank you for everything. I know we didn't start off on the best terms. I was jealous, Caroline admitted. Watching you come in and claim a life I'd wanted. But you earned it. Earned him. And I'm glad you're here. The words meant more than Eliza could articulate. Acceptance from someone who'd been here longer, who understood the weight of this choice. September came with cooler mornings and the first hints of fall color in the trees. Eliza felt the baby drop lower, felt her body preparing for something she couldn't fully imagine. And then, late one night when the moon was high and the world was quiet, the pain started. Caleb rode for Martha, breaking every speed record he'd ever set, while Eliza tried to remember how to breathe through the contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. Martha arrived with Ellen, both of them moving with the calm efficiency of women who'd done this before. They sent Caleb outside. He tried to argue, but Martha physically pushed him out the door and told him to make himself useful boiling water. The birth took hours. Long, painful, terrifying hours where Eliza was sure she was dying, sure the baby was dying, sure everything was going wrong. But Martha's voice cut through the panic. You're doing fine. Just breathe. Push when I tell you. You can do this. And somehow, impossibly, she could. The baby came with the dawn, a tiny girl with dark hair and lungs that worked just fine, announcing her arrival with a wail that brought Caleb running back inside despite Martha's orders. He stopped in the doorway, staring at Eliza holding their daughter, and his face crumbled. You did it, he said, voice breaking. You're both all right. We're both all right, Eliza confirmed, looking down at the tiny person in her arms. Come meet your daughter. He crossed the room slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement would break the moment. Then he was beside the bed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression full of wonder. She's so small. She won't be for long. She's got your stubborn chin already. And your eyes. He looked at Eliza. What should we name her? They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this tiny girl who'd fought her way into the world, Eliza knew. Hope, she said, because that's what she is. What we built together. Caleb nodded, eyes bright. Hope Rourke. I like that. Martha and Ellen left them alone after making sure both mother and baby were stable, promising to return the next day with more supplies. When they were gone, Caleb climbed carefully into bed beside Eliza, and they sat together watching their daughter sleep. I was so scared, Eliza admitted, that I'd lose her, lose you, lose everything we'd built. I know, me too. He kissed her temple. But we made it, all three of us. Yeah, we did. The months that followed were exhausting in entirely new ways. Sleepless nights and constant feeding and the particular terror that came with being responsible for something so small and fragile. But there was joy too. Watching Hope grow stronger, hearing her first laugh, seeing Caleb hold her with such careful tenderness, it made Eliza's heart ache. The ranch kept running, though they adjusted their expectations. Some things could wait, some things they did together, with Hope sleeping in her sling while they worked. And some things the community helped with, neighbors stepping in without being asked because that's what people did here. A year after Hope was born, they stood at the same rise where Caleb had first shown Eliza the ranch. But now there was more to see. The expanded house with its new room for the baby, the rebuilt barn, the garden that had finally started producing reliably, and in the distance, the school where children learned and played. When I brought you here that first day, Caleb said, holding Hope in one arm and Eliza's hand with the other, I thought I was just getting help with the ranch, someone to cook and clean and keep the place running. And instead you got someone who can't cook as well as you, shoots at raiders, and built a school. Yeah, he smiled. Much better deal than I expected. I could say the same. I thought I was getting a practical arrangement, a roof and safety and honest work. And instead, I got a partner, a family, a home. She looked at him. I got everything I didn't know I needed. Hope fussed, and Caleb shifted her to his other shoulder, the motion so natural now it didn't require thought. Eliza watched them, her husband and her daughter, solid and real against the backdrop of this harsh, beautiful country, and felt the last piece of fear fall away. They'd done it, built something that lasted, something worth fighting for. The land stretched away in all directions, vast and indifferent as always. But they were no longer alone in it. They had each other, had their community, had this life they'd carved out of dirt and determination and stubborn refusal to give up. You think we'll make it? Caleb asked quietly. Long term? We've made it this far, through storms and raiders and nearly dying more times than I want to count. Eliza squeezed his hand. Yeah, I think we'll make it. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard. That's when we're at our best. He pulled her close, careful not to squish Hope between them, and they stood there as the sun climbed higher and painted the whole world gold. Three people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, who'd built something beautiful out of necessity and need. Below them, the ranch waited. Work to be done, cattle to tend, a future to build day by day. It wouldn't be easy. This country never made anything easy, but they'd be doing it together, and that made all the difference. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, Eliza would tell her the story of how her parents met, about a woman who stepped off a stagecoach into mud and doubt, and a man who walked 6 miles in the rain to meet a stranger, about partnership that became friendship, that became love, tested by bulls and raiders, and a land that demanded everything. And she'd tell her daughter the most important lesson she'd learned in all those hard, beautiful years, that sometimes the boldest thing you can do is take a leap into the unknown, trust in your own strength, and build a life worth living, one stubborn choice at a time. The story of Eliza and Caleb Rourke wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, messy and hard and earned through blood and sweat and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. And standing there on that rise, watching their daughter point at the cattle and babble nonsense words, they knew with absolute certainty that they'd do it all again. Every difficult choice, every moment of fear, every time they'd had to be stronger than they thought possible, because this was their life, their home, their future. And it was everything.